Day 1. When they first approached me about participating in a government experiment, I was desperate. Desperation is a powerful motivator, capable of making even the most insane ideas seem reasonable. The government promised food, shelter, and a generous payout at the end. All I had to do was stay awake. It sounded easy enough. I wasn't the only one who signed up. There were 4 others: Alexei, Dmitry, Sergei, and Ivan. We were led into an underground bunker, the air heavy with the scent of damp concrete and mildew. The scientists explained that we would be confined in a sealed chamber with a continuous supply of a stimulant gas designed to keep us awake. They wanted to observe the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation on the human mind and body. The chamber was small, barely enough space for the 5 of us. There were no beds, just a few uncomfortable metal cots. A single dim light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We had a small supply of food and water, enough to last us a month. The door closed with a loud, echoing clang, and the experiment began. Day 3. At first it wasn't so bad. We talked, played cards, and tried to pass the time. The gas made it hard to focus, but it kept us awake. I could feel my mind growing foggy, but I still managed to hold on to some semblance of normalcy. We joked about how we would spend our money once the experiment was over. It was a welcome distraction from the growing sense of unease. By the 3rd day, the effects of sleep deprivation were becoming more apparent. We started to get irritable and short-tempered. Arguments broke out over trivial things like who got the last piece of bread or whose turn it was to use the makeshift toilet. The scientists watched us through a small reinforced window, scribbling notes on their clipboards. I couldn't help but feel like a rat in a cage. Day 5. The 5th day was when things started to get really strange. I began to hallucinate, seeing shapes and shadows that weren't there. I could hear whispers, voices that seemed to come from the walls. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then the others started to experience the same thing. Alexei was the first to snap. He claimed he saw his dead mother standing in the corner of the room, watching him with hollow eyes. He screamed and pounded on the door, begging to be let out. The scientists ignored his pleas, their faces expressionless behind the glass. Alexei eventually collapsed in a heap, sobbing uncontrollably. By the 7th day, the chamber had become a living nightmare. The constant whispering voices were maddening. We tried to block them out, but they grew louder and more insistent. Sergei began to mutter to himself, his eyes darting around the room as if he were seeing things the rest of us couldn't. The gas continued to pump into the chamber, its sickly, sweet odor permeating everything. I could feel it seeping into my skin, my lungs, my very soul. Sleep was a distant memory, something that existed only in the past. My body ached, my muscles screamed for rest, but the gas kept me awake, kept us all awake. Day 10. On the 10th day, Dmitry attacked Ivan. It was sudden, brutal, and completely unexpected. One moment they were talking, and the next, Dmitry was on top of him, pounding his fists into Ivan's face. We tried to pull him off, but he was crazed, his eyes wild and unseeing. By the time we managed to separate them, Ivan was barely conscious, his face a bloody mess. The scientists didn't intervene. They watched, detached and clinical, as if we were nothing more than subjects in a lab experiment. I realized then that they didn't care about us, not really. We were expendable, mere tools to achieve their ends. Day 15. Halfway through the month, the chamber had become a hellscape. Ivan's wounds had become infected and he was delirious with fever. Alexei had stopped eating, his eyes sunken and hollow. Sergei's muttering had turned into full-blown conversations with people who weren't there. Dmitry paced the room like a caged animal, his movements jerky and erratic. I could feel myself slipping away, my grip on reality weakening with each passing hour. The whispers had become screams, and the shadows had taken on monstrous forms. I knew they weren't real, but they felt real. More real than anything else in that chamber. The scientists continued their observations, their faces growing more and more dispassionate as we descended into madness. Day 20. By the 20th day, Ivan was dead. He had succumbed to his injuries and the infection, his body lying cold and stiff in the corner. The rest of us were too far gone to care. Alexei had retreated into himself, refusing to speak or move. Sergei was now completely detached from reality, babbling nonsensically about things that made no sense. Dmitri had started to self-mutilate, using a shard of metal to carve into his own flesh. The gas continued to flow, relentless and unyielding. I could feel it eating away at my mind, eroding my sanity bit by bit. I tried to focus on something, anything, to hold on to some semblance of myself, but it was a losing battle. The chamber had become a tomb, a place of endless torment and suffering. Day 25. By the 25th day, there were only 3 of us left. Alexei had stopped breathing during the night, his body wasted away from starvation. Sergei's delusions had reached a fever pitch and he had to be restrained to prevent him from harming himself or others. Dmitri had become a shell of his former self, his eyes vacant and lifeless. I was the only one left with any semblance of awareness, but even that was slipping away. The whispers had become deafening, the shadows closing in from all sides. I could feel my mind fracturing, pieces of myself breaking off and drifting away. The scientists watched, their expressions unreadable behind the glass. Day 30. On the 30th day, the experiment ended. The door to the chamber opened with a loud hiss and the scientists entered, their faces masked and expressionless. They moved with practiced efficiency, collecting data and samples, their eyes never meeting mine. I was too weak to protest, too broken to care. They took me to a different room, away from the others. They asked me questions, their voices distant and hollow. I answered as best I could, my words slurred and disjointed. They nodded, scribbling notes on their clipboards, their faces betraying no emotion. In the end, they told me the experiment had been a success. They had learned what they needed to know, and I would be released. They promised me the payout, as well as medical care and support. I didn't believe them, not really. I knew I was just another expendable tool, another casualty in their pursuit of knowledge. They let me go, and I stumbled out into the cold gray daylight. The world outside felt strange, alien. I was a different person now, broken and scarred by what I had endured. I knew I would never be the same, never be whole again. The Russian sleep experiment had taken everything from me, my sanity, my humanity, my very soul. I was a hollow shell, a ghost of the person I had once been. And as I walked away from that nightmare, I couldn't help but wonder if I had truly escaped, or if a part of me was still trapped in that chamber, doomed to relive those horrors for all eternity. Desperation can lead us into dark places, but we must remember that not all promises are worth the cost. In our pursuit of survival and gain, we must be cautious of the paths we choose, for some journeys can irreparably damage our soul and mind.